We're gonna discuss this idea of circling the wagons. What I presented in the Huffington Post article, just to review, was that what's occurring so much these days are individuals developing their sort of perspective on items and basically promoting their perspective in such a way that it's just a matter of protecting their perspective. The result is a lack of any type of interaction or dialogue of ideas. So it becomes one group saying A and one group saying B. And what occurs when this happens is the group saying A basically are just yelling their viewpoint, and the group saying B is just yelling their viewpoint, with some perspective that if you sort of like just scream, you're going to get your way. It's almost like it's almost like this verbal fight. Whoever can shout louder will win, or whatever. But the result of it is the lack of interaction of the ideas between the two groups. So the groups become very, very solid, and then what happens is the presentation of ideas that simply support their perspective. So you become entrenched. And what occurs is, again, when there's communication, the communication is not actually to communicate, it's just to present your viewpoint. And when you want to communicate, you really have to do two things. A, you have to think about what to say so that the other will hear you. And then you have to think about how you're listening to try and understand what the other is saying. If you really want to communicate, it's not enough just to present your ideas. You have to figure out how to present those ideas so the other will listen. And then you have to figure out how to understand what someone's saying to you so that you can understand them and you can be listening to them. And those two talents are so foreign in our world today. Now, the truth is that this idea is fundamental to Jewish thought. And there's a reason why it's fundamental to Jewish thought. It really emerges from the concept of the oneness of God. And this is something that most people don't recognize. Dichotomy of ideas, in many ways, emerge from a true division between concepts, or between good and evil. If it's black, it's not white. If it's white, it's not black. So you have dichotomy. Ideas, basically, perception of ideas become an aspect of a dichotomy. So, for example, in terms of, let's say, Christianity, the idea of doing something for the self meant you weren't doing something for the other. And that's how sexuality became a problem. Because sexuality, you say, like in terms of love, I love, but that love sexually finds expression through self-satisfaction, through the satisfaction of the sexual drive. So what occurs is that in Christianity, they had a problem with love and sex sort of coexisting. If you got a benefit from it, how can you call it love? Okay, therefore there was a strong dichotomy in the sense that this is bad, this is good. If it serves me, it's got to be negative. So therefore how can it be something that's giving? Therefore you had developments of things like vows of celibacy, vows of poverty. How can it be, how can it be beneficial to me and caring for the other? What occurs is that, and this happened in many, many different ways, and really is at the root of idolatry, in the sense that idolatry saw divergent forces, and these divergent forces were opposite to each other, were at negative with each other. What occurs is with the and that's really what idolatry is about. So, if there was a value of beauty, it cannot coexist with a power that's ugly or whatever. Therefore, Aphrodite and Mars couldn't connect. The point is with the concept of oneness, in terms of Judaism's commitment to oneness, ideas all have a common source, i.e. HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if ideas all have a common source, then ideas cannot simply be categorized as good and evil. The idea itself can't just be categorized as good and evil. There had to be some expression that was good or some expression that was evil, but the idea in itself could not just be categorized as one or the other. There had to be some reason for it. If everything comes from God, there has to be some kind of purpose to it. Now, maybe that purpose is limited or whatever. Maybe it's not that often, but you have to have some purpose. Yeah.
Would you call it segmented parts of a greater whole? Or can you not segment the part?
Well, the fact is that's what we have to do, okay. Because the truth is in the Kadosh Baruch Hu, it's a simple oneness. We can't relate to the idea of that simple oneness because we can't understand God. So what we have to do is basically fragment and understand the place of every fragmented section, recognizing that there has to be a place that they all fit together. This is found, for example, in let's say universalism and nationalism. Okay, there's a concept of nationalism which has its place. There's a concept of universalism which has its place. You have to find where to draw the line and figure out how to put them together. But in some way, the fact that everything comes from God means there has to be some kind of place for everything. In a simplistic understanding of good and evil, you can simply define something as good or evil, and therefore you can divide lines. So you can say this is good, this is evil. And therefore you come up with very broad definitions of the difference between the two. So therefore, and that allows for what we're talking about tonight, the circling of the wagons. I'm right, you're wrong. This value is right, this value is wrong. This is good, this is evil. And then the other group says, no, this is good, this is evil. And there's no point of contention and so forth. In a certain way, if you recognize that everything comes from God, then basically what you're left with is still the necessity to understand when to apply this value, when to apply that value. There will be a determination of good and evil, but the determination of good and evil takes the wisdom of God to really understand what's good and what's evil, but it doesn't come about from strict definitions of the two. It comes about from the weighing of the two and the subtle necessity of how to place one over the other in a specific idea. Let me give you a couple examples of that in terms of ethics. And it's really interesting when you think about. I'm thinking of two ethical issues that exist in the world today, where the two sides on these ethical issues basically circle the wagons and become very entrenched. Well, within Jewish thought, there's an understanding of the values behind both those sides. It doesn't mean that anything goes. The Torah does state, here's the answer, but the answer comes out of a subtle understanding of the dialogue. Let me give you an example. One example is abortion, okay, between pro-choice and pro-life or whatever, and so forth and so forth. If you ever see people, protesting, we usually have one group yelling one group yelling the other, and basically, you're crazy, you're evil, and it's basically, a total concept of both sides just circling the wagons. Within Jewish thought, there's actually tremendous recognition of the value of the fetus as a human life, and also a tremendous recognition of the quality of life of the mother as the host for the fetus, and in certain ways as the fetus as part of the mother's body. And what you find is within Jewish thought a tremendous issue in terms of abortion, in the sense that there is the recognition of the issues in terms of when life begins and the dependency of the fetus on the life of the mother, which makes mother paramount in certain ways, because the fetus is not an independent life yet. On the other hand, and at the same time, there's also recognition of the mother and the quality of life of the mother, and the effect of this growing part of her body in a certain way within her. So what you find within Jewish thought is, on one hand, a tremendous respect for the fetus and the rights of the unborn child, and respect for the concepts in terms of pro-life and so forth and so forth. But also you have tremendous understanding of the other aspect in terms of the effect on the mother as the host of the fetus. So you have issues in terms of the health of the mother, not just the mother's life, but the health of the mother. Okay, you have issues in terms of a rape. You have issues in terms of let's say an ancestral rape. Okay, and the fact is you see a tremendous amount of tension, but that comes about because when you look in terms of the enforcement, they're going back and forth on it because they don't circle the wagons, and that's because the depth of the issue is really an understanding of God in terms of the broad source of both these values, and both these values having the same starting point. You also see this in terms of euthanasia. Tremendous tension in terms of understanding of euthanasia. On the first level, there are strict definitions, strict halachic parameters on euthanasia in terms of murder and so forth. On the other hand, there is at the same time an understanding or recognition of what this of the various issues involved in terms of quality of life. There's a medrash Gemara that Lord Jacobowitz brings down in Jewish medical ethics, where there's a famous statement that says, "A tov v'rofim legehenim." You ever hear this? "A tov v'rofim legehenim." The best doctors go to hell. Now, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. Okay, so the general understanding of it is the way most people understand it is the best doctors are so egotistical they don't know how to say thank you to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for assisting them in their medical ideals. They basically I did it, I saved the guy's life, and so forth. So the best doctors go to hell because they become very egotistical. There was a movie from There was a movie where, I forget the movie, but in it there's one scene of a doctor who basically says, I am God, or whatever. And that's a perfect example of it. A doctor who's really, really good thinks that, hey, listen, I'm so good, almost I'm godlike, and that type of ego could be the best doctors go to hell.
You've never heard the term medical deity?
Right. Okay, but there's one interesting understanding of Tov Barof and the Gehenna. One viewpoint is the best doctors go to hell. Why? Because the best doctors have such sympathy and such empathy for their patient who is suffering that they'll do euthanasia, which is murder. So the point is, they're basically saying, something, the doctor who's really, really sensitive will be driven to do euthanasia because they have that kind of sensitivity. Now, the truth is that it's unbelievable how you hear in terms of shilas, when questions come up from Rabbanim, that border on questions of euthanasia and so forth. You would think that the populace has a very simple answer. It's euthanasia is usher, and so forth and so forth. And you hear Rabbanim sitting there and they're arguing it through and saying, okay, what can we do? With an understanding that if someone really is in a lot of pain, you really like to find a heter to take him out of the pain, which recognizes a certain aspect of quality of life. Now, what happens is you can't do that, and a lot of times people sit there and say, that's the halacha and so forth. Okay, and that is the halacha. But the point I'm trying to point out is the fact that you see both sides. And that ability to see both sides comes about because you don't circle the wagons. Right? The halachist is not interested in just saying, I'm right, this is right, and that's evil. You actually want to hear the other argument. Because you recognize that the other argument may have something within it that has some aspect of the divine in it. Some aspect of some value which doesn't have priority in this situation, but has a place in the greater corpus of understanding of God and understanding of life. That comes about from the ability to dialogue. That comes about from the ability to understand and to investigate. Now, this really comes about in the way that people learn. In the sense that when people learn, you want to know the argument against you. You don't just want to be around people who basically want to share your thoughts. Yeah.
I'm not sure if the abortion in the American context, I think the Canadian also one, the arguments are basically, within sort of the left side of the spectrum. I don't mean every person who buys into it, but, the main columnists, the main politicians and so on. Abortion, all abortion should be legal.
Right.
And within the right side of the spectrum, they're saying, look, every state had its own laws, until the mid-'70s, and then there was this Roe v. Wade, and some judge, made some silly decision that due to privacy, the American Constitution gives everybody right to abortion. So all of a sudden, it's got to do with the federal government superseding the state laws. Like if I read the right-wing, like magazines and so on, they're basically saying, look, every state should have been able to make its own decision. Yeah, so it's not that they don't see the other side of the argument. It's just they're against, the federal government taking this over and deciding.
Yeah, you see, what you're raising is actually two issues. What occurs within our discussions, right, in the context of North America or the States or Canada or whatever, is that certain debates enter into other issues.
Right.
The debate of abortion becomes a debate between state rights and federal rights. The people
the overarching
right,
religion.
Right, and also you had the same argument in terms of the Civil War, where people argued that, rightly or wrongly, they argued that people, it wasn't the issue was not slavery. The real issue was the right of the state versus the right of the federal government. But both sides become entrenched upon their perspective. It's the people arguing for the federal government start screaming, "This is federal," and people going to say it's state. And the fact is that it's really the balancing of those two values and trying to figure out how to balance them. And that doesn't come about through entrenching. See, in that discussion, the abortion issue becomes part of the emotions involved, which then becomes part of another issue. And it's all basically because you want to have a certain perspective. But what I'm arguing is that, and this is, I think, a fundamental concept within Jewish thought, is you want to get the overall understanding of both values and the necessity of how those values are balanced, with the recognition the values really all emulate from the divine. See, now, I'm not going to argue that state rights versus federal rights, or like from a Kodesh Baruch, they're not, okay. But the point is what you're really dealing with, and this is a tremendous issue, is the self versus the community. Okay? And when you get to community, you go through different stages. You go through family, you go through immediate community, then you go to a broader community. When you deal with, and we've talked about this before, the kid from North Bay who will get access to a operation at sick kids, okay, at a hospital. Well, a kid in Guatemala, right, won't have that same access. What's the difference, right? But what's the difference? Assuming the same socioeconomic status, what's the difference? They're both human beings. Well, one's a Canadian, one's not. Well, how does that make a difference? And then
we've described some political entity such as
but
Canada,
it's not just,
it doesn't make a difference that they're both human beings.
But on the other hand, the political entity reflects communal.
Right.
It reflects a certain commitment. Like, people don't notice this, but when Christianity talked about, had very strong, in certain Christian ideas, very strong anti-family perceptions. Like there's certain statements within Christianity of giving up your family for Jesus or whatever. You speak to Rabbi Skobek more about that. But the fact of the matter is, and Judaism had very strong attitudes about family. It also had very strong attitudes about peoplehood, which Christianity also challenged. But the point is that when someone assists his child or her child, why is that child different than assisting someone else? Why? Because they have shared DNA? Why, that's it? Just sometimes they have the shared DNA, so go check the DNA on the other kid. Maybe they have some of the shared DNA. The point is that emotional bond of family is perceived to reflect some type of concept. But the point is that point is that there is a development of a broader perspective, and then you have to deal with family and non-family and equality, and all human beings are equal and so forth. So the truth is that this really gets you starting to think. And what happens is, in many ways, is that circling the wagons, basically saying, I'm right and they're wrong, and this is just what's right, and it doesn't allow for the greater dialogue to really allow for the development of the ideas. Now in the states, the truth is that the federal versus the state rights really are a lot of people are finding this out after the election, where Donald Trump won because the electoral system, which really valued the value of state, but lost the popular vote. So how do you understand that in terms of democracy? Democracy becomes not so simple. So democracy does not mean one man, one vote. Democracy means one man, one vote within a recognition of certain collective. And people will argue that, yes, it's correct that Rhode Island has 2 senators and the state of New York has 2 senators, even though there's vastly different populations. The point is that no one ever discusses, we no longer deal with why or whatever, we no longer deal with the fullness of that discussion. And that's really what happened with Roe v. Wade, in the sense that people are saying, what about state rights? And the fact is we no longer talk about it because both sides entrench. They don't know how to dialogue. Now the truth is that that's much more in the secular realm, but I'm bringing it much more into the Torah realm. That in many ways we in the Torah world should dialogue. That's basically what we're about. Yeah.
Several questions. Number one, do you think that in our global community today, the thought that all human beings are created equal is a greater convention? In other words, that child in Guatemala does, in fact, have a greater chance today in the reachability through the internet and connections that can be made of coming to sick kids and getting that operation that's necessary.
And the fact is, there's greater universalism today.
Okay. So
okay.
That's
Okay. Wait a sec.
Sorry.
Wait a sec. There's greater universalism today, and there is a trend to universalism, and the liberal forces in the world really push universalism. Mm-hmm. The result of that is a breakdown of borders. Okay. Mm-hmm. The point is, though, is that what occurs, or what are the consequences of that universalism? Now, there's some consequences which I'll make negative or whatever, because, and we talked about this when we talked about stone. The fact is that you're so protective of your area that you're not going to deal with, that you don't have universalism. But the point is what can occur because of that is a breakdown of specific cultures. So what occurs is when you have universalism, you have much more multiculturalism, which in a certain way is very, very good, and so forth and so forth. But on the other hand, you don't have specific cultures. So therefore, people who basically moan, like what's happened with Brexit, in many ways in terms of England, where people basically saying, not that everyone turns them into these monsters. And I'm not saying there aren't egotistical, self-centered people who might say, Britain, or bust. But what happens is the person sitting there and saying, I want my culture, and what I find is by putting up by not having any borders, my culture no longer exists that I'm happy with. It's the same way as your home. If you have a home, you want to set it up the way you want. If you basically say, listen, anyone can come into my home, well, this guy likes this, and that guy likes that. So what happens is I no longer can set the pattern for my life. And this is part of the tension. But we don't even describe that.
Well, in terms of Hafnasat Orchim, though, we try to make our guests feel welcome, and we imbue this to our children. We try and follow this concept so that we can build an acceptance, a tolerance for people. But within that, yes, you have a problem then at the greater level of the multicultural effect and the potential breakdown of Jewish practice as well.
Well, what you're saying about Nachas Orchim is very interesting. Mm-hmm. Because what is the responsibility of the Orach in that mall?
Good question.
Okay? So, for example, let's say there's enough wine for one more glass, right? Okay? Should the Orach take it, the guest? So it's specifically brought down that if there's only one cup left, you leave it for the host. In other words, you have responsibilities towards recognizing the place you're in, that you're still a guest. Now, the point is that people don't often recognize that. Okay? The fact is that comes about from a recognizing of the tension. Hafnasat Orchim works from the fact that the host wants to make the guests comfortable, but on the other hand, the host also has a certain comfort level that he or she is entitled to. Okay, and these are examples of things. I remember I once had a person come over to me, and it so happened. It was really very, very strange. I had some friends of mine this is years ago. I have some friends of mine who were visiting us from New York. And they asked if it was okay if they brought a friend of theirs along. I said, okay. I didn't know the person they were bringing along. This person was friends with our friends. They wanted to bring them along and so forth. Okay, fine. Okay, so this person came in. I had no connection to this person. We went to shul in the morning, where we went to shul, and it just so happened that there was this girl at the shul who knew this girl from New York, okay, and they were excited to see each other. Well, we haven't seen each other from Israel and whatever it is, and so forth and so forth. So what happened was this girl from Toronto, who I really didn't know either, came over to me. How do you know this girl? I said, I don't really know her. They came with friends and so forth and so forth. Anyways, at the end of davening, this girl from Toronto comes over to me and says, I want to do you a big favor. I'm going to do for you a really big favor. I'm going to give you the mitzvah of achnasas orchim. Okay? I'm going to come over to your house for Shabbos lunch. I'm going to give you the mitzvah of achnasas orchim. I'm going to do you a big favor.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. The point is wait a second. The point is that okay, I said, okay, so you can come, whatever it is. Okay, the point is that you have this type of thing. Now, how many of these people know the other concept of Shomer Matanos Yichya? Soneh Matanos Yichya. The person who hates gifts lives. There's a concept in Judaism of not just taking gifts. Okay? There's a concept of being orich, but the point of the matter is that you should be a little bit humble. The point is, and there's that tension in the sense of that. You want to thank someone, and on the other hand, and so forth. Anyways, but what's really remarkable is that within Jewish thought, you really present these ideas. But the fact is when you present a lot of ideas, they're usually presented in a vacuum. So everyone presents this concept of being machnas orach. It's so great to take in guests. What then is lost is the fact of the responsibility of a guest and the recognition that the host has some responsibilities as well. I've gone up to a lot of people who pride themselves on taking guests in every week and so forth, and I've said to them, do you ever spend time with your kids at a Shabbos table without anyone else there but your kids? Mm-hmm. How much time do you give to your wife? Something that at times I've told them, listen, you should know when you shouldn't be machnas orach, because you have responsibility to your family to give them time. The fact is that when you have a broader recognition of the complexity of values, then you start understanding how the values all work with other values, and this comes about from the concept of a oneness of God that leads to some kind of overall perspective of balance. And what happens with entrenching or with circling is that people don't see the other. Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of examples, because I see that's sort of the Dennis Prager show. More and more, the left and right inhabit different universes.
Yes.
And in the American context, one is going to win and one is going to lose.
That's what's happening.
Right. Now, let's say you take the example of Israel. Okay, so again, I'm not saying, left, the average, the left-wing person here and there, but the right, whether they're Jewish or not, the Canadian-American right perceives Israel as sort of, the arsenal of democracy, an imperfect state, but something that's a hell of a lot better than everything around the region. The left increasingly sees it as just an occupying power that probably should not have been created there in the first place.
Right.
Okay. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but in the Democratic Convention, they told everybody, other than Hillary, not to mention the word Israel because it was too contentious for the left. Mm-hmm. So it's not as if, let's say the left wanted a 50% tax rate, the right wanted 30, and you compromise at 40. So at the end of the day, how do you compromise something like that? Let's
You
say
know,
you're right.
I'm not talking. See, the thing is, I'm not talking compromise.
Right.
What I'm talking is how do you dialogue.
But what's
The point is
There's
both
no-
the left and right. That's exactly the problem. They don't know how to dialogue. Now,
but I'm
why-
not sure what you mean by dialogue.
Okay, so the point is that let me give you an example. I might have told you this example before. When I was a student for an MBA, I had a prof who was my prof in economics, who I then developed a relationship with because I worked with him as a TA and so forth. He went to the London School of Economics for graduate school, and he said that there was one course there which dealt with, I guess, economic theory and the background and history and so forth and so forth. And the prof did a remarkable thing for giving a grade. What the prof did, let's say within the first week of the class, and this was for graduate school, he would sit there and say, listen, 50%, at least 50% of this course will be decided on a debate that I will assign you at the end, towards the end of the semester, on issues such as Marxism versus capitalism. Okay? Now, I'll assign certain students will have to defend Marxism, and certain students have to defend capitalism. And what occurred was, at the beginning, the students would say, oh, I'll defend capitalism, I'll defend Marxism, they go so forth and so forth. And they say, okay, I'll sign up for this group. And the prof says, no, we're not assigning the assignments right now. He waited until much later on in the course, right? And you already see what's happening. And through class discussions and so forth, he found out who the Marxists was, and he found out who the capitalists were. He found out who was on the other side. And then he'd walk in, here it is a few weeks before the end of the semester, and said, okay, the debate will be, and this is going to count for 50% of your mark, or maybe 60%, with everyone knowing that if you botch up this, you'll fail, and failing a graduate course is not so simple, right? There's really repercussions to this. And he found out, he said, Mr. Smith, you'll take this, you'll be for Marx. So this, if he found out who every capitalist was, who every Marxist was, and he gave him the other side. Right. So here was this kid who was a real strong Marxist, and he had to defend capitalism. Now, in our world today, can you go up to someone who says, listen, you're really against Israel, well, give me Israel's argument for what they're saying. And your course will depend on it. And if you don't do well, we'll fail you, and you'll be out of school. Kid will be in cognitive dissonance and go crazy. The point is, though, is that type of argument doesn't mean you're going to change your mind, but it means you're going to start understanding what the arguments were.
But
okay? Now, what I've seen with most situations
right.
is exactly what you're talking about, is entrenching. Both on the right and the left, they don't know the other person's arguments.
Okay, I'll tell you this. If every right-wing intellectual that I could think of, okay, and I could do the same thing here, if you put a gun to their head, they could make the Palestinian argument, they could make the Arab argument better than most people can. If you put a gun to my head and you tell me, I'm going to shoot you, or within 5 minutes you're going to make an argument for BDS, I could do it. I know they know the facts, they know the history.
Okay.
It doesn't work the other way around. They'll call people Islamofascists. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
What you're saying is...
At the end of the day, let's say United States, the country's either going to believe that Israel is the main source of problems in the Middle East, the occupation, or Israel's the good guy. And both sides have to battle it out.
What I'm saying is to battle it out. The truth of the matter is what you're saying is that it's quite possible that between these two sides, one is more open to hearing the intellectual arguments than the other one, and that may be true. What I'm seeing, though, and the truth is that I watch the news, and the truth is that the news is frightening to me. because what I see are two groups yelling at each other without the ability to understand what the other person is saying. Now, what you're saying is that the left may be more at fault in this regard, in terms of being able to articulate the other side. That may be true, and the reason for that is because there's a certain emotional PR that serves the entrenchment of the left. Because all you have to do, is basically show someone. Some person suffering in that particular situation, therefore you have an emotional picture. Arguing for more right-wing positions usually it has to go back to history and what the concepts were. What I find is that there is an ease of expressing the problem or whatever, but the point is like you take in terms of let's say the refugee issue, and I think the refugee issue is a real issue. Okay, I think that on one hand, it's really bothersome to me that people who are suffering can't get refugee status. I mean, I feel terrible I really feel bad for people who are suffering. On the other hand, I do think there is a concern for security. Now, all you need to do to support the refugee story is that story of that kid, Rahman al-Islam, who was washed up on the sea. That's for sure the argument for that. To argue again for the need to vet and a much more right-wing position on that, unless you actually have a terrorist attack, right, which you want to avoid in the first place, right, because you're basically working on surmising and so forth, and hopefully you will stop it, you're not going to have such an easy argument. The point being is that there is a lot of emotions that are played into this, but the truth is you're right in what you're saying. But what I'm saying is that what occurs, or what I guess I'm going through, is while this is a real issue in the real world, to me, it's not just, this is the way I make my point, and it's not just that you put a gun to someone's head and you'll get this point. It's the fact that the call of Jewish thought is to see these viewpoints. In other words, what I want to hear is divergent theory. This always existed within Jewish thought. Beit Hillel understood what Beit Shammai was saying. Beit Shammai understood what Beit Hillel was saying. They understood the arguments against him. They understood what the viewpoints were.
And yet were able to solidly hold their positions.
Right, and they still withheld...
And respected each other.
Right. And that doesn't mean you always respect everyone.
No.
The Sadducees and the Pharisees didn't have too much respect for the Sadducees. But the point is, they would know... They would know that what the concept, and the reason for that is because Jewish thought's perception of an overriding concept of oneness creates an idea of, I want to get the full picture. Okay, I want to get the full ideas, even those ideas which are going to be secondary. Okay, I want to know what's going on. Even though those ideas won't hold water under the full scrutiny of the events. Now this is something that's it's very difficult in terms of Israel. It's very, very difficult because Israel in order to win the emotional PR, what are they going to do? Let the world fall apart and say this is what happens? No, they're obviously protecting themselves. One of the things that I mentioned this before, about water. When you're talking about water, everyone talks about Arabs and so forth and so forth. There was a clear migration to Palestine after the Jews came there and built up the country. Okay, up in the Galil, it was all swampland. Okay, when the early Chilitzim came and made it agriculturally viable, you had people coming from across the Middle East moving to Israel. But then when they moved to Israel, you couldn't really tell the difference between them and the Arab who was there 100 years before, because they all spoke the same language, and they also. But the point is they weren't in Palestine from before. They were in Palestine from last week. But what really attracted them? The fact that the Jews came up and built up the land. People don't know history. It drives me crazy. Like I said about the BDS thing. You know, people talking BDS and Palestinian and occupied land and so forth in '67. Yeah, did anyone talk about the fact that Jews weren't allowed to go visit the Kotel from '48 to '67? Okay, that the Arab countries invaded Israel in '48, and '67 was in response to what the UN declared an act of war. The blockade of the Gulf of Aqaba was theoretically an act of war. No, it's just Israel attacked and conquered. Well, wait a second. The point is, but no one's going to look at that, because all you have to do is show a nice picture of a person suffering and you do this, and you know how to create the PR.
And I was just saying this earlier today. To any other country, the conventions of war would apply. You conquer territory, it's yours. No other country is going to argue. You have to give it back.
No. They're arguing that with Russia now.
Now.
Yeah. Okay.
And now, perhaps because of a Middle Eastern president.
Yeah, but okay. The fact is that, you know something. Okay, it's.
I'm not trying to circle the wagons.
Okay,
I actually have magnet.
Okay, I'm just.
Example.
Trying to. What I'm trying to say is that what you're saying is so real, and it's bothering you so much. But what I'm saying is it's exactly what the problem is, and one of the problems is because no one's working out how to. There's not as much effort in how to express. The thing I get upset with, let's say, with Trump's tweets, is I think he has a greater responsibility to express his viewpoints in a certain way. He can't just throw out these viewpoints. The point of the matter is that if you have people who are very much against you, you have a greater responsibility to figure out how to say it to them, right? Rather than just making a statement that lasts good for your side. See you in court. Whoa, it's the way some. The fact of the matter is, you have to be able to express yourself in a way that gets the other person to listen to you. Then there's right, and since when does a person and then other people have a responsibility to try and understand them. And the world today is not doing that, right? No one's sitting there and saying, "Let me try and understand what their argument really is," and no one's sitting there and saying, "Be careful about how to make this argument." And that comes about from the study of Torah, because the study of Torah teaches you to think about perspectives. Now, it's very, very disheartening because there are a lot of issues involved. And there's a lot of listen, I spend my days extremely my days are very sad, because whenever I watch the news, I'm disheartened by both sides. I see the left as just yelling and screaming, and I see people on the right arguing the same way. And everyone making a joke of it, and SNL is a joke, and this is a joke, and let's try and make fun of it, and so forth and so forth. With what really is without ever really saying, listen, what's really going on? What is that person really trying to say? You know, like that thing that happened with Conway. You know, where she said, "I go out and buy Ivanka's thing." Now, the truth of the matter is that she was just trying to make a statement. But no, we have to make it into this political thing. Ha 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 ha. The fact is that let's try and understand what someone is saying. No, but we have to try and shtuch, get a point in. Wait till you slip up so I can get you around the other way. You know? It drives you... And the truth is that I see that on the right and left. I may agree with you, I see it more a little bit on the left these days. Okay? But the truth is that I really... I thought that Gorsuch, his response to Trump's statement about so-called judge, that's what I want to hear from someone in authority. I want a guy who sits there and says, listen, he's a judge, I disagree with him. You know, everyone talks about Scalia, what's his name, Scalia, and you know, who is Scalia's best friend on the court? Who is Scalia's best friend? Everyone's talking about Antonio Scalia, the great right-wing judge. Who is his best friend on the court? Ruth Ginsburg.
A left-winger.
Totally. Right? Why did they get along? Because they had mutual respect for their ideas. Mm-hmm. And they spent time together. I wouldn't say best friend. They spent time together. They had respect for each other's ideas. Right? Okay, if you would have said to Scalia, would have made a so-called statement about so-called judge about Ruth Ginsburg, I'm sure he would have, you know, knocked your head off. So when I hear Gorsuch basically saying, what are you calling? You're calling a judge from a court of appeal so-called judge? And you say to and the appeal court decides something 3-0? So that's why you have a Supreme Court. Go to the Supreme Court. Okay. See you in court. What are you, a landlord? I mean, the fact is that this...
The answer to that is yes.
The answer
He
is
a landlord.
But the answer is that,
Like,
and I want to make it clear, I'm not just attacking him. I take SNL for the same time, for the same thing. Okay? The fact of the matter is there's no respect for thought anymore. So I'm right, you're wrong, and I'm going to try and win any way I can. By mocking, or by showing, or by getting you to cry, or without an issue. Okay? Yeah.
Again, I'm going to disagree on that. So let's take the issue with Colin Conway.
Yeah.
Okay, so up to now, from my understanding of American history, at least recent one, the sort of understanding the sons and daughters of the presidents are off limits no matter how much you dislike him.
Right.
Okay, so let's say had Hillary won, okay, I don't think the right would have, put pressure on companies not to run Chelsea's, whatever.
Chelsea doesn't have it, but the fact is...
So what the right is saying is, okay, up to now, okay, we've had warfare, political warfare on presidential battle, but now you're taking it to the kids, okay? And they're telling the left, this is a battle that you're starting. Okay, so that's what they're saying. So that it's not a matter of understanding, it's a matter of, we're living in peace, and then you got your machine guns, so we have to bring our machine gun in our tank.
Yeah, something, I have...
The conventions are changing.
I have... did it start with the left? Did it start with the right? I don't know. I'm not trying to basically say it's equal. I'm not trying to say that either. I'm not in any way trying to justify the left or justify, the behavior I'm seeing where, by the way, it shouldn't be that no one is thinking, and no one is thinking. The fact is the person I use as an example of a person I thought acted properly was this new Supreme Court justice, who would be a right-winger or whatever. I'm not trying to say the left is right, the right's right. What I'm saying, though, is that there's a trend. Where it started is one issue, but there's a trend where people are trying to win without really thinking. In other words, I'm not trying to. I think that what happened with this thing about protesting against Ivanka Trump's clothes, the way you're getting back at Donald Trump. That's crazy. That's stupid, and that is a reflection of you're right. Leave the kid alone. And there's other issues like that and so forth. But what I'm saying is that in other ways, I see just a dropping of the conversation on all levels. Okay, SNL gets away with it doing because it's a joke. It's humorous. But Alec Baldwin did go to that women's march. So obviously, Alec Baldwin is doing his thing, but he's also being political. Okay, if Alec Baldwin wants to just be a comedian, let him just be a comedian and so forth. Jon Stewart, if he wants to be a comedian, but he's not just a comedian. Right? He doesn't equally attack everyone.
What about John Oliver? You don't know about John Oliver?
No.
Last week tonight. YouTube it.
Okay. I'm not trying to okay everything. What I'm trying to say is that in so many different ways, we're avoiding the real issue. Mm-hmm. We're basically throwing out arguments to try and win without the real issue. And
that being the understanding and the glue that does bind us to
right. And the fact is it may be that one group is doing it worse than the other group, but the fact is that the response has to be with ideas, and we're not doing that. And one of the reasons we can't do it is because we live in a world of an attention span that lasts 15 seconds, right? Right. The fact of the matter is that you can't give intelligent arguments anymore because no one has the time to think through intelligent arguments. So all you have is these little sound bites.
Yeah, we've trained ourselves.
And your point is well taken when you say the idea about how some people how you feel that some people have really pushed they could give those intelligent arguments. But they don't have the chance to anymore because no one's willing to listen to them. Okay, we're all caught up in winning and all caught up in the, I was, and the manipulation is both ways. I just find we're not really dealing with issues. And something I see this. Chuck Norris visits Netanyahu. All of a sudden, that's a big thing because Chuck Norris visits Netanyahu. We're now indestructible. I mean, it's a great photo shoot because everyone Chuck Norris has this connotation. So the point of the matter is that's all we're trying to do. Now, the reason he has to do that is because other people are crying another way. Yeah, I mean the fact of the matter is that it's like no one's really dealing with the issue. This goes back to the Bosnian War, okay, and the Serbs versus the Croats, and everyone was on this side, and so forth, and the world came down with a very simple idea. The Croats were being suffered by the Serbs and so forth and so forth. Historically, when they started investigating this, where did this friction come from? It came from the Croats acting improperly to the Serbs a generation beforehand. Now, the point is no one ever dealt with that. It's like no one really ever dealt with the real underlying reasons for these things and so forth. And no one's really interested in really trying to work out a solution.
What happened the generation before that, or the generation before,
Right, and so forth.
And power waxes and wanes
Listen,
within the world.
everyone talks about Hebron, being an Arab place. No one goes back 100 years ago and find out whether there was a Jewish community in Hebron. How many people talk about that? Now, the truth is that there are a lot of issues involved on both sides, but we don't investigate. What?
All the Middle East is big screw up of French and British colonies and Turkish. They divided the way they wanted, and it doesn't fit today.
And no one recognizes the issue of the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration was the imposition of a colonial power upon the land. So when people refer to the Balfour Declaration as the right of international law, well, international law just rejected colonialism. Don't go there. The point is that people don't really want to deal with the full depth of an issue.
So how do you want to solve problems today?
The point is you intelligently investigate them. You need some intelligence. Therefore, what you really need is people who are willing to be intelligent, discuss things.
But isn't it today everything is by
Exactly.
power?
Exactly.
Whoever has the biggest guns and has
The point is that what I'm saying is that we have to what we have to do. And by the way, I'm not saying this is going to work in the public sphere. I'm not going to say this is working in this sphere. I'm not saying this is what you have to do in terms of a practical solution. What my argument is that we, as people who think, we people who learn lessons from Torah, have to recognize what Torah calls us for is to think. Okay? To at least know the fullness of the situation, to understand the depth, understand the arguments. Not necessarily just because it's going to push you to agree, but understand what you are disagreeing with. And then there's issues in the world because the world's not going to have it. It's very frightening. I'm not going to say that this idea is going to work in the world, but I am going to say that we should at least be aware of it. We can't just circle our wagons. We have to understand what's going on, and that's what that's really what we're trying to talk about, and then recognize that the world presents a problem because everyone is doing it, and in certain ways, it may be frightening the people who are really doing it, because there may be an imbalance, what you're saying, between the two sides in terms of who's using their heads in any way or not.